This is my first video on this channel. I have a lot more to come, and I'm just excited to get started. A little bit about myself. My name's Alex. I live in Tucson, Arizona, and I do remote freelance work, so that gives me the ability to travel a lot and go on a lot of these little solo trips. So I just thought to myself, why not record them and just share my experiences? I hope that with these videos, you might be able to learn something interesting about these places. Maybe it'll help you if you ever plan to travel there, or if you just want to sit back, relax, and enjoy looking at some cool nature and scenery, then you've come to the right place. In this video, I'm visiting Chiricahua National Monument, and the drive there itself was really amazing. That's what I love about road trips, just being able to see the scenery and the landscape change around you as you drive. I arrived at the park later that evening, but it was already pitch black out because the sun sets really early around this time of year in Arizona. Anyways, I drove into my campsite, set up my tent, and just got ready for the night. Not gonna lie, I had a pretty rough sleep that night, so I ended up waking up a lot later than I thought I would. But for the first time, I got to see what my campsite actually looked like when it's not completely dark out. I saw a Mexican blue jay hopping around on the ground and thought that was pretty cool because I don't really see birds like that too often. Even from the campground, I could start to see some of the really cool rock formations. Eventually, I packed up all my stuff and got ready to head out for the trail. Along the way, I passed by a few deer who were just minding their own business. I was planning to do the Echo Canyon Trail, which is a short 4-mile loop that takes you through the main area with all of the hoodoos. And in case you didn't know, hoodoos are the name of those tall, thin rock spires that you'll see everywhere in Chiricahua National Monument and in other places in the American Southwest like Bryce Canyon. The hike was just amazing. There's no other words I can use to describe it. It wasn't even one of those where you have to walk a long distance before you start seeing really cool views. It's one of those where you can see amazing scenery literally right from the beginning of the trail all the way to the end. What made it even better was that I literally could not have asked for a better day out, and there weren't even that many people on the trail. So for most of the time, I felt like I had it all to myself. Along the hike, I passed by a cave-like area called the Grotto, and eventually made my way down into the canyon, where you could see a dried-up stream with a few little puddles of water here and there. The views from the bottom of the canyon were just insane, because it made the hoodoos just look so massive. I kept on hiking and eventually reached a junction with a beautiful view of the valley, where you could even see far off into the distance beyond it. The trail eventually began to loop back, with even more spectacular views of hoodoos above the forest, and I stopped for a quick snack. I don't want to sound too cheesy or anything, but I just remember that while I was walking this part of the trail, I just thought to myself about how grateful I am to be able to experience places like this, and how beautiful of a world it is that we live in. Shit, I start to sound like a hippie. Eventually, the path led into a more forested area with a lot more shade, which was nice. After I finally finished up the hike, I drove up to Massai Point, which is the end of the scenic drive in the park, and a really popular place with even more spectacular views of the hoodoos and the vast Chiricahua Mountains. Before the sun set, I wanted to get one last short hike in, which was the trail up to Sugarloaf Mountain, the highest point in the park. I don't want to get too repetitive with this, but again, the views were genuinely some of the best I've ever seen in my life. And I've been to a lot of places, especially in Arizona. I've been to 22 national parks, I believe. And even though Chiricahua is not a national park, at least not yet, the views are definitely up there with some of the best I've ever been to. About right here is what it looks like at the summit. There's also a lone fire tower at the top, but for some reason I forgot to get it on video. Fast forward half an hour or so, and now I'm driving back down the mountains. In my opinion, one of the best feelings in the world is just driving out of a park during sunset, knowing that you've already made the most of the day. By the way, again, this is my first video. Most of the clips in this video are just recorded from my iPhone, but as I continue the channel, I'll try to get better equipment and actually learn how to take videos for real. That night I drove an hour and a half to the town of Bisbee in southeastern Arizona. It's a really unique place that used to be a mining town, but sort of lost business over time, but eventually it ended up becoming a pretty popular tourist destination, and for good reason. I didn't know it at the time, but apparently the hotel that I booked, the Hotel L'Amour, is actually supposed to be haunted. It's got a long history, there are a few ghost stories, but luckily nothing crazy happened to me that night. I woke up that morning with just an amazing view of the entire town of Bisbee. It's so unique how some of the houses and buildings are literally built into the mountainside. That morning I spent a little bit of time just walking around the town. The hills are a color of red that almost remind you of Utah or someplace like Zion National Park. The red color of these landscapes is just due to the copper, which they apparently mined the shit out of about a century ago. Looking back on it now, I wish I could have spent a little bit more time in Bisbee, just because of how cool it was and the unique charm of it. But I was planning to be back home in Tucson by the night, and I wanted to stop by Tombstone along the way, so I didn't get the chance to stay too long. On the drive out of town, I stopped by a giant mine called the Lavender Pit, and read some of the signs to learn about the history of the place. The mine is actually just huge. It almost looks like a meteor crater in the ground. Another place I stopped by was Erie Street. It's an old part of town that was preserved to still look like something out of the 1960s. And I personally thought that was really cool because I'm into vintage western kind of stuff. This place almost reminded me of the town from the Cars movie, and that sort of brought me back to my childhood a bit. For the last part of this short trip, I drove up to the small town of Tombstone. It's somewhat of a cultural icon because the town used to be home to famous outlaws and cowboys of the Old West. I remember back in college, I took a course on classic Western films, and that's why I had to visit this place, because a few iconic movies are set in this town. Right here is the OK Corral, which was the site of a famous gunfight back in the day. Well, that was pretty much it for the trip. I remember on the drive back, it was one of the brightest sunsets I've ever seen. Like, the sun was directly in my eyes at some point, but eventually it got better, and again, it was an amazing drive. Anyways, thank you so much for watching my first low-quality video on this channel, and please subscribe if you enjoyed it and want to see more of this kind of stuff. I go on either day trips or short road trips almost every weekend, and I'll be trying to post on here as much as possible. And stay tuned for my next video, where I'll be hiking one of the craziest trails in Arizona that you've probably never even heard of. Again, please subscribe and feel free to leave a comment.